Hello, welcome. Welcome, welcome. How is everybody? Um, Today is just a quick stream. Just doing some piano Q&A. Some people sent in some passages or some questions. Oh, hey, I'm glad you're doing well. Thank you for tuning in. Some people sent some passages and some questions. I'm about to share here. Um, and we're going to take some time today just to go over them. If you have any questions in chat, then please let me know. Please feel free to ask follow-up questions. I don't know how long it'll take, so feel free to pop in and out. And yeah, we'll go over a few of these things. So the very first thing that I have going on here is a passage by a composer named Shiro Sagisu that someone sent in, and I was asked to kind of discuss it for a bit. And what I'm going to do basically is I'm going to move through these passages and kind of break them down, what I would do, what I would avoid, and just some things that hopefully will be kind of helpful. So, usually, the first thing I do for a passage like this is I'll try to find any kind of weird notation stuff at a glance, because I know that stuff like that is probably going to be helpful, as we move through the passage. My first observation was that this left hand is going to be eventually hitting a reach between that A and that C sharp that is going to be just too much for me. And by the way, I'm using this app called Chordy, so thanks to Chordy, and you can see down here, right below my finger, you can see that there's a little button that comes on when my sustain pedal's down. So you'll also be able to see when I'm pedaling through things or how quickly I'm changing pedal. So I do notice that this guy here is only a half note. So probably at some point I'm going to release it. And what I'm really looking for here is for the pedal to take me, right? So I'm going to end up doing a fingering kind of like 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 5. So let's put that in. 1, 2, 4. 1, 2, 5. Probably 1, 2, 5 again. Then 1, 2, 4. Then probably 1, 2, 5. 1, 2, 5. Right? So these kinds of movements, they're very common in the piano literature. They're very common across repertoire, where we'll just have to move chords over and over, right? And one thing I want to point out that since we're pedaling, right, we could just do finger 5, finger 5, finger 5, right? Totally nothing wrong with that. And depending on your hand size, that might even be preferable to you, right? You might prefer to just do 5, 5, 5. Because either way, we're going to want to lift the unit of the hand, the wrist, the fingers, the forearm. We're going to want to lift it all to get to the next chord. Right? And also let me know in the chat if my audio is okay. Let me know if everything's coming through well. So as we move through this, I'm going to make sure that this is moving up and down. My torso is moving to the side, right? And my forearm is moving laterally by way of my elbow opening up just slightly, right? Okay, thank you. I'm glad the sound is okay. You know, everything that can go wrong will go wrong, you know, this kind of thing. For the left hand, I'm just doing a very simple fingering. 5 is taking me here, right? And then through this, I'm doing 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, right? And notice I'm not changing fingers on the repeated note, on the repeated C sharp, right? You certainly could do if you wanted to, but for me at the moment, there is no need, right? So with those two things in mind, right? A kind of lateral idea and making sure we're going up and down in the forearm. Pardon me. Right? Onto each and every chord, right? And then that motion is just going to get smaller and smaller until we're only lifting like to the key height even. Pardon me. Pardon my reading, if that's... I think that's it, sorry. No. Sorry. That's it. F natural. It's a beautiful chord. F major 7 augmented over A. Wow. So anyways, this is true for all kinds of chordal patterns, right? Whether I'm doing, you know, kind of double thirds, right? There's going to be a period where I'd like to practice that, feeling that up, down, up, down, up, down, 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 right? Into every interval, right? Octaves, and chords like this. Sorry, wrong note. So that's what I'll say about this passage, and thank you for submitting it. One thing I meant to mention. The reason I'm changing 4 to 5 is kind of for a, how do I put it? It's mainly a psychological thing, right? And this is why I say many people could just do 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, right? But for me, it helps me to kind of feel spatially where I'm going. It helps me to center things because now suddenly my hand can kind of be my ruler, right? Where I'm feeling 4 on this G sharp and it's helping me kind of spatially understand where that A is, right? And now I can kind of relate these. Right? So, to be clear, I'm not feeling my way through it with my fingers, right? Like I'm not connecting 4 and 5. Right? I'm just changing fingers for the psychological benefit. Oh yeah, and now in the chat I see what's the benefit of going from 5 to 4 in the top chords. And that is exactly the benefit, is just because I'm feeling 4 kind of rotate over 5. Right? So it's something that I'm doing purely for a greater sense of spatial awareness. Right? It's not actually a technical thing, and I think that it doesn't actually make you go faster, because either way, you're going to have to go thumb, 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 right? So I think either way, it's going to have to be this very quick up-down movement in the forearm, right? And yeah, that's all I had to say on that passage. Thanks for submitting that. Does anyone have anything burning? Any burning questions regarding that particular passage? And I know that naturally there's a bit of latency, you know. It's a very beautiful passage. I didn't know this composer at all, and I was kind of taken by this opening, pardon me, this opening chord, this opening harmonic statement. I thought it was kind of beautiful, kind of, and I guess they're spelling it as an E sharp minor 7 over A, moving to an F sharp minor 7 over A, to G sharp minor 7, to A major 7, C sharp minor 7, and then finally like an A7 in inversion, right? Or, well, maybe not in inversion if we hold that A, but in inversion if we just let it kind of sit over that bare C sharp, right? Pardon me. So yeah, thank you for that passage, and that kind of applies to anything, like I said, with chord movement, kind of, horizontal chord movement pushing through a phrase. The next passage is from the same piece. We have this kind of leaping triplet pattern in the right hand. And again, first I'll go over a fingering, and then I'll kind of go over a sort of way that I'm going to group these mentally, which to me makes them considerably easier. Right? So the first thing I'll say is that I'm putting both of these notes in finger 1, right? My 1 is going across the 2 keys, so I can put them both in there. So I have an E, C, G, F, and I'm putting 3 and 5 in the top, right? And because it's kind of a lush texture, I'm not really worried actually about keeping 1 down, right? Without pedal, I'll just play this. Right? Sometimes I recommend practicing these passages without pedal so you can make sure that you are practicing disconnecting the notes with the speed that you need to in order to kind of cover these leaps. Right? So I hit 5-3, and then I hit 4-5, and I feel a kind of impulse moving forward in the piano. And then again, it's a full forearm lift down to 1-5. And then a 3-5, right? And I'm going to write this for the forearm lift. And then again, a full forearm lift. And I'm going to do something here. I'm going to do a 4-5 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these guys here are being played by 1, 2, 3. And these top 2 notes are being played by 4 and 5. Yeah, I did. I am hitting 2 notes with 1 finger, and it's more common than people might think, right? Especially when I'm playing 3 and 5 I'm playing C and E with 3 and 5, right? It might be actually easier for me, because as I play 3 and 5, if my thumb just comes out to the side, it might be easy for me to just kind of slap it with my thumb kind of at an angle to the keys, right? My thumb doesn't have to be crooked, right? And the thumb doesn't have to be straight all the time to the key. In fact, any of our fingers or our forearm or any body part really can be at an angle with the key, right? So if I were to show you something equivalent with the left hand here, let's say I'm pressing F and A, and I can just bring the thumb down and put down D and E, right? This is a very, very common device, more common than people think, especially with the thumb, but with some other fingers, you can do it with, if you play on the crack between the notes, you can really put 2 notes down with any finger, right? The usefulness of that is different, but yeah, it's a very common technique. If you play a lot of classical music, it exists a lot in Bartók. also exists a lot in French Impressionist music, right? Ravel, that kind of like that passage in Judeau, where he's putting down the F and the G, right? I mean, the alternative is, or something. The alternative is something strange like a thumb cross, right? Like 1, 2, 4, 1, 4, 2, 2, 1. It's kind of hard to land two notes with a non-thumb finger. I agree. It takes a lot of accuracy to land two notes with a non-thumb finger. I almost never see that in passages at a considerable tempo. I usually only see that kind of thing on slow passages with like a very thick, very dense harmony. I totally agree. Very hard to land two notes with a non-thumb finger. The only exception I would say is this kind of thing, when like I'm playing at an angle here on the low keyboard, and I'm playing a D with like finger 3, and now I'm brushing the E flat with finger 3 also, and they both go down, right? That's a time where I'd say it's a little too easy to land two notes with one finger, and I've certainly had a lot of issues where I've accidentally put down a black key by rubbing against the side of it, coming down onto a white key. All right. If you're a jazz fan, there's that famous Keith Jarrett. How does it go? That very famous Keith Jarrett ostinato where he plays 5-2 and then hits the G and the A, both with the thumb. So yeah, it happens a surprising amount that people will just kind of put these whole tones into the thumb. So back to this passage, although that's a very useful digression. Back to the passage. I'm doing it again here. I'm just going to do... You know, and you could do 1, 2 here, right? But the hand end is kind of looking like this. I prefer a more relaxed hand, right? So it might take a bit more practice in terms of the spatial awareness, or like the spatial coordination. Might take a bit more practice. But for me, it's really worth it in terms of comfort. That brings me to grouping here, where I'm going to really feel a strong kind of mental group here, and then here again, as I kind of drop my arm, right? I'm doing a full lift drop again, right? And I'm ending up kind of doing, I'll do groups here in green, ending up kind of doing a group of 3, and then I'm ending up doing a group of 2 and a group of 2, even though they're part of the same rhythmic group, right? Triplet, triplet. Now, as far as this goes, this to me is the most important. The most important thing here in making this leap is how we treat the note that comes before the leap. And this is something that I totally stole from the Tailbun people. You know, I play the chord, and again, I'm not concerned with holding down the chord, right? If I'm going to connect anything, it'll just be fingers 4 to 5. Right? And then I'm going to rotate off 5, and it'll take me there. Right? So it's all to do with this rotation off 5, and the forearm now is rotating back into the chord, and I'm playing 5-4 on that C to the B. Oops, pardon. Fingerings are in black. 5, 4, and again 1, 1. Again 1, 1. Right? Just playing it with the thumb at that side angle there. Yeah, another really great texture, you know, if there's any questions about that passage, yeah, I didn't really know this composer. Someone sent in this passage. They were looking for some help with it, or some thoughts on it, and maybe not help with it, but they were just looking for a perspective on it. And yeah, I really like this passage. Kind of reminded me of Chopin, that kind of those figures. I can't remember what piece that is, but to me it had a very similar physical affect. So let's move forward. Let me know if there's any questions about the previous piece. The next piece we have going is from Bach's F minor Sinfonia, the 3-part F minor, and I can't remember the BWV. Where is it here? Somewhere. 795 BWV 795. So when discussing Bach passages, it can be tricky. It can be a delicate thing. I'm going to kind of discuss this passage in 2 ways. There are people who are very staunchly against the use of pedal in Bach. There are people who love the use of pedal in Bach as like a coloristic, romanticizing thing. And then there's people in between who like to use pedal in Bach to facilitate ease of playing, but don't like to hear that the pedal is being used. So I will touch on the main 2, the first 2. The people who don't like to use pedal at all, and the people who like to use a bit of pedal to facilitate ease, but who don't really want the voices to kind of blur together in too romantic a way. So I got some specific prompts for this passage for the person who sent this passage in. They said that they were having difficulties coordinating the hands because of an element which is very, very typical of Bach's 3-voice works, which is that we take the middle voice and we distribute it between the right and the left hand. So the high voice is played by the right hand, the low voice is played by the left hand, and then the middle voice is kind of distributed between the 2 hands. Right? This piece is no different. Every 3-voice Bach piece kind of engages with this, and many 4-voice Bach pieces engage with this. So my starting point here would always be understanding the voices. And then there, I know it lands there because I looked ahead. Sorry. So I'll finger these separately. So I'm going to hit this guy with 5 for now. I'll hit him with 5, and I don't have the previous bar in front of me, so it could be that it could be a different finger is easier on this note. But just looking at this in isolation, I'll hit this with 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2 is comfortable for me, and then 1 is comfortable for me there, and 2. And then here what we have going is so I think what I'm going to end up doing here is playing this middle voice all thumb. Right? Well, maybe not all thumb, maybe except for that C. I might end up playing it all thumb. Such a beautiful line, so chromatic. Yeah, so gonna end up playing 1, 2, 2, 4, 3, and then this middle voice is going to be taken 1, 1, which is such a common physical movement in Bach. Just go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, all the way down. It's ones all the way down. And then there I'm going to play 3, 5, 4. And the way I'm compensating for 4 is I'm moving in a little bit with my forearm, moving towards the fallboard. And that is putting my hand down a little bit, and the hand is going to end up putting the E natural down on finger 4. So the sound ends up being like this. We have two possible options, right? The first option is to treat this with no pedal whatsoever, right? And in that case, we're going to have to do some finger pedaling. And finger pedaling is this phenomenon, you know, we're playing something totally dry, and we have something here that we can't connect. So we just connect one of the two fingers. Pardon me. Right? Or as close as we can. So for example, if I were to play C and E with 1 and 2, and then I were to play B and D with 3 and 1, or 1 and 3, right? I can't connect both of those notes. Right? So the way that I would practice it is like that. Disconnecting the E, really exaggerating that disconnect, and then putting them both down. And then I'm going to try and make the distance between the E and the D shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. Right? Until hopefully someone couldn't hear the difference, unless they were really listening for it, right? And certainly, depending where you're playing the Bach, you know, it's like I like to listen to Sviatoslav Richter play Bach. The reverb is so intense sometimes, you know, in those recordings. You know, if you're playing in a great hall, that disconnect would be really, really difficult to hear. That very tiny disconnect, right? This, for me, is one of the most problematic passages in Bach. One of the most problematic types of passages in Bach. Because the soprano is playing a note which then the alto is playing a beat later. So there is no note that we can finger pedal here. These are both just going to have to disconnect. So if you want to play this with no pedal, then you'll have to just disconnect this as quickly as possible. Right? Because we can't play the C twice without it coming back up. So we're trying to hear A flat, C, and we're trying to hear C, E flat, D. We're trying to hear both those things, and hopefully just be as quick as we can on the rearticulation of the C, so it's not noticeable. Now, I'll say this. What I like to do personally is I like to play the C, and then don't forget you can see my sustain right there. When you say finger pedaling, are you just talking playing legato? That's a great question. So when I say finger pedaling, I'm talking about this idea that we have two notes moving to two notes. And we are in such a scenario where one of the two can be played legato, but the other set of notes cannot be played legato. So for example, playing this on 1 and 2 and playing this on 1 and 3, if we're repeating 1, then that top voice can't be literally physically legato, right? But we can still make it sound legato by kind of fudging it a little bit and making sure that one of the two voices is really legato and making sure that the other voice is as short as possible in the gap between them, right? right? So that's finger pedaling. It could be that there's another term for it. Finger pedaling, I had a really great teacher a few years ago, and this was the term that she used for finger pedaling. Or for this concept, the term she used was finger pedaling. So, the name isn't important. The idea is we have two notes, we can't connect them both, so we'll connect one, and we'll try to make the disconnect as small as possible on the other one, right? Now, in this case, you can't connect either note, right? But in this case, you can connect one of the notes, right? So here we have a B, a 3 on D. The D to F, pardon me, the D to F can connect. But the B to B flat cannot connect. Unless you were to use 2, which I dislike because I don't really like moving to 4 on E. Once I have 2 down on B flat, I far prefer doing that. Right? So the thumb to thumb movement isn't actually connecting, right? Obviously. But I'm trying to make it as subtle as possible. I'm trying to make the disconnect as subtle as possible. Right? But ultimately what I prefer doing is this. I play A flat with the thumb. I play 2, and I catch those with the pedal. And then the whole forearm moves up just slightly. And then I come down. Right? The challenge here is for it to sound and psychologically feel like counterpoint, even though we're physically disconnecting things, technically, right? And that can be difficult, and it was difficult for me to get used to at first when I started doing this. But I think it's really worthwhile because, as a general rule, if you want to control the voicing of a quarter interval, you would preferably be lifting the whole arm and bringing the whole forearm down onto that quarter interval, right? So if I want better voicing, then I'll use that pedal trick. The bad version and the good version, just to hear the difference. Yeah, of finger pedaling? Someone asked, can you play the bad version and the good version just to hear the difference? I think I see what you're saying, of finger pedaling. Here's an example of, there's so many examples in Bach, where, here's an example. Do you hear those kind of clunky cutoffs? Right? As we lift, things are not really feeling connected. Or you hear how long that disconnect is between the E and the D? Right? But now can we make it shorter? Right? So this is the kind of thing here. This mostly rears its head in Bach, in terms of when people play like 4-voice fugues, and they're doing stuff. They're doing stuff like this, right? Where they'll take these moments like, I'm trying to think of an example. Like this is an example. As opposed to, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I don't have to find an example. I think everyone will understand this. People sometimes in Bach will just disconnect both voices instead of disconnecting one of the voices, or instead of disconnecting physically and connecting with the pedal, right? And that's the thing that I'm trying to avoid, is that really clunky coming up, right? Like when there's just a big gap between two voices. Instead, you can connect one of the two and make the other one as subtle as possible. Yeah, someone asks in chat, are you in camp 3 trying to hide pedal usage in Bach? I'm personally someone, when I play my own Bach, I personally don't like to hear the pedal when I play Bach. There are players who play with pedal and I like to hear it, right? I'm not really personally an advocate for playing Bach a specific way. You know what I mean? For myself, when I play it, I prefer not to hear the pedal. But I do like to use pedal, especially... Pardon me. Especially on passages like this where there is no note that I can finger pedal. Both of these notes have to disconnect. Right? And it's very difficult to do. For me, it's easier to just coordinate my foot with my hands than it is to get that timing like perfect, because it really has to be perfect. And there's value in that, you know? Don't get me wrong. There's value in that. So here we are. What I'm going to do is I'm going to circle the notes in pink that I'm going to catch with the pedal. Right? And every time I catch with the pedal, I'm going to lift both hands and bring them down to voice much more strongly. And then if I have time, I'll catch that guy. Actually, maybe it's not necessary because I have the next bar over. I actually think that I can sort that out. Pardon me. Right? So I think one thing I'm missing here, one thing that's kind of giving me trouble, is I need to make sure to release the soprano. So I only have two voices there on that beat. Right, and there we are. Right? So for me, this is how I would move through this, right? As far as memorization goes of this kind of thing, one thing I really like to do is to sing through all the voices, right? And really try to memorize and hear them and play them all together. I think the person who sent me this passage is probably already doing that. One thing that also helps me greatly is taking the rests in Bach and using them as a tool with which I can cue my other hand to leap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these beats that the rests are on, and I'm going to use these beats to cue a leap, right? So what I would like is I'd like to feel my hands coming down together. I really want to feel that sense of togetherness. And then here, once I play this 2 and 4, I'm going to cue the leap. And then feel these two come down together again, right? So it's like there's a pulley system, right? On that one note, where my hand comes down and it pulls the other hand up, right? The reason I like this so much is because I like to feel the movement of one hand during rests as just part of a single unified choreography. I don't want to think about moving while I'm playing something. I don't want to think about doing two things at once. I would like the playing to cue the movement. Right? And there I am. I'm right where I need to be, right? Especially in a piece like this where I have lots of time. I even did it early. Which is not a bad problem to have. But, worst case scenario, it will just lift. Well, I guess since I'm pedaling, I could use the pedal going down as my cue. But personally, I really like to relate the hands to one another. And then we have an A in the next bar that I think I'm going to put in the left hand, right? Which is why I put it there. Right? And then at that point, it becomes an issue of voicing. Right? This is one of those things where, when playing through Bach, the thing we're hearing and the thing that's literally happening, they can be at odds with one another, right? We're trying to hear three discrete voices moving separately from one another, right? But what we actually have to be doing, literally, is playing two keys at the same time and voicing them just right. So when all else fails, I do like to switch gears and think of it that way to make sure that I'm getting the balance I want. And I could be doing a better job on voicing the F. I'd like to hear the voices better. Not very clean. Right? Any questions on this one? This is how I would approach this kind of thing. Right. Now, I want to be clear. Am I happy with how this sounds? No. I'd want to work on it more. But these are the strategies that I would employ. Like, for one, I'm hitting that A flat, I think, too strong. Are there any techniques you use to help memorization besides rote repetition? One thing I'll say is that when I started thinking of the hands as being interdependent as opposed to independent, that really helped me with memorization on this kind of piece, right? And this is why I'm talking about this kind of thing, right, where, like, I would say it depends on the type of memory that you feel is lacking, right? If you feel like you're hearing all the voices, no problem, then there's something else going on, right? Maybe it's a physical memory, right? I do things like sing through notes on solfege. I'll move a bar through all 12 keys. One thing that is super helpful for me is playing a passage from memory at half tempo, right? Another thing that I find super helpful is playing a passage from memory, but only playing one voice from the passage, but using the fingering. Right? So if I wanted to memorize this, if I wanted to memorize that alto voice, that's something I would do, move through it very slowly, right? I think part of this for me, memorization, I think, if I'm having trouble memorizing something, the first thing I do is I scale back the size of the passage, and then I try my best to move through it extremely slowly, right? But I think also this is one of those things that recording yourself is good for, right? And one of those things that introspection while you're practicing is really good for, right? If you're moving through this, if you're trying to play this bar by memory, right? Sometimes it is a different thing that's falling apart. If you feel like you're really hearing the voices, but the body is just not happening, right? Then I think go to this choreography, try to unify the arms and the hands, try to make it a single choreography instead of trying to do two different choreographies at the same time, right? If you're not hearing the voices at all, I would say move through the voices in solfège, sing through each one. You could also do that Nadia Boulanger exercise, which is really good. C, E flat, D, D, F, E. Right, that Nadia Boulanger exercise. For those who don't know, it's to play the notes of a contrapuntal work, a chorale, a fugue, and you sing one of the voices, and you play every voice except for the voice you're singing. Ba, ba. Oops. Ba, 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 ba. Not easy. For me, not very easy. So these are the things that I use to help with memorization. For me, those two aspects have always been the most critical, right? The sonic and the physical, right? Another thing that I kind of like to do is I like to memorize just one voice, and then I like to cover up the music and make sure that I'm looking at my hand doing it. Right? I really, really want to make sure that, because people talk about a visual memory. They're usually talking about memorizing the score, right? Which is totally fine. One thing that might be underrated is this visual memory of how it's going to actually look on the keyboard, right? And this is something that jazz musicians are really, really good at, right? Is this understanding, right, of just how these shapes look. Bach is exactly the same, right? I know right? I know how these things are going to look at some point, and that's kind of the shape. That's going to be where my visual memory really kicks in. And maybe I'll be a little bit bilingual. Maybe I'll try to think of the score and the kind of, keyboard map, the layout, right? This is something I wonder, sometimes I get students, they're really young kids and they've learned a bunch of music off of those like YouTube things where the bars come down and it lights up the piano, right? And I think those things get a bad rap, but in a sense there's something to them, because those I had one kid who I took a lesson with him, and that was like all he did all day was that, and he knew so many tunes just from memory, right? He knew so much music just from memory, and I think it's because he had a much more streamlined connection between the visual memory and the physical memory and the sonic memory than like I did, coming up on this style of notation, right? So I think there's something to be said for taking a break from the score, even if it's just one voice, recommitting yourself to this, to memorizing the shapes on this interface, right? and maybe even putting a voice or two voices into MuseScore and watching them light up, if there's a bar that you're really having trouble with, right? So those are the ways in which I practice memorization, right? There's the oral, I'm trying to hear everything. There's the physical, I'm trying to bring everything into one unified choreography. And then there is the visual, which is a memorization of the score, but also a kind of orientation with the visual mapping of the keyboard in front of me, right? Because as I memorize, I will be looking at my hands, With that, we have much of the same stuff here, right? So I've taken this A. Again, I would pedal here. I would catch this with the pedal, right? Take this in the... This is going to eventually go back to the right hand once I hit this C. And I would hit this with 4, 3, 5, 1, 4, 3. And certainly I could pedal this beat, catch this beat, right? And on a grand piano, personally, for this type of pedaling, I really like to use the middle pedal because it doesn't make as large of a sound with the dampers lifting, right? So that's a time where I really can't hear the pedal when I use the sostenuto. But sometimes the sostenuto is not very well maintained. It just depends on the on the piano that you're working with, right? A complete shift in gears here. Unless anyone has any questions about the previous passage, the Bach. This is a bit of Debussy from his violin sonata. Here we are at measure, 102, I think? Somewhere near the 100 range. So what we have is someone expressed to me they're having trouble getting this legato, right? Well, I don't know if they're having trouble. The person who sent this in was a pianist who I quite admire, so I'm sure he's having no problems with it, but it is a great example of a tricky concept, right? So for me, this concept is we have these notes here in the left hand, right? And we need this to sound while we're playing this ostinato, right? All in one hand. Very difficult passage. I'll say this. Immediately, I'm less nervous because the right hand is doubling. Pardon me. Right, so for me, I'm immediately less nervous because I know that the left hand is going to sing through more with the note being doubled, right? So I know I'm not going to have to voice it quite as aggressively. Right? So the way that I would practice this is I would take it chord by chord, make sure that it's voicing. Right? This is just like that Bach, right? If something's giving us trouble, we can always get back to the question of what's literally happening, right? The subjective thing that we're going to hear is this line and these two voices. Right? But what's literally happening is we need to voice this chord. Right? And another one of those times where I'm going to make sure that as I pedal through, I'm going to make sure in my practicing, I'm going to exaggerate that lift so I can voice that chord exactly as I want. And I'm not very happy with that. I want to voice it better. And here I'll switch to 1 and 2. Alright, so what my fingering ends up being is 3, 1, 4, and then I switch to 1 to 2. And then it's going to be 5. Right? And whenever I have moments like these, where this is going to be 5, 4, 3, right? It's going to be 3, 2, 1. I'm really going to make sure I exaggerate the forearm lift, and I'm going to make sure I change pedal over here in that moment. And again, right? We're doing 1, 2, 3. Really going to exaggerate the forearm lift. I'm going to change pedal over here. Right? So it's one of those things where it looks like a line. When we're practicing it, it's going to feel like we're playing chord, 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 right? And then we want to get back to the horizontal sound, and we're going to achieve that by the way we voice the chords. Right? So through this, we want to get this line legato. It's going to happen with pedal, though. Right? And it's okay. I'd probably take a little bit of time, to move through this. It's difficult, though. It's difficult to voice it. Even the chords, just on their own, they're not so easy to voice, That's no joke. Right? So this is how I would approach this kind of passage. Taking each of these instances where the notes line up at the same time, and making sure my entire forearm bending at the elbow is coming up, and that I'm voicing the chord exactly the way I want. Right? So, simple solution, not an easy solution, right? A lot of things we do in piano are simple, but not easy, right? Like kicking a soccer ball well. People who are really good at it are really, really good at it, So with that, we probably have time for, I would say, one more, maybe. And then let me know if you want me to do another one of these. So this is from the Mozart C minor Fantasia. We've had a key change to C major, so don't be alarmed by the lack of key signature. And we have this difficult and quick kind of Alberti passage in the right hand, right? So I had a teacher who used to get me to practice Alberti passages with the low note being really staccato. And I would probably give similar advice here, right? Now, I might express it differently. I might express it actually as a grouping problem, where I'm going to make sure that I'm cutting off this leap, right? I'm going to make sure this leap is not connecting so that I get the smoothest possible sound, and so that I get this kind of solid sound on the downbeat. Right? So what I'm doing there is I'm disconnecting the D, right? And I looked at this briefly ahead of time. What I was experimenting with on the B flat and A, I was experimenting with 3, 2, 3. I was experimenting with 4, 3, 4. And I was experimenting with switching between them. Because I felt that 3 on the B flat was a bit of a leap, but I didn't mind it if I just did it once. Pardon me. right? And a passage like this is so about, this rotation movement, this doorknob opening movement, right? But what's really crucial here is that I'm centering my kind of physicality, my sort of psychological gravity, right, is centered around the B flat and the A, right? And I guess what I mean by that is that my elbow is almost oriented just behind the B flat, maybe just a little closer to me to make this a little easier. And then my thumb is just tapping D, and I'm back. Sorry, it's not easy to do when I'm holding my own arm. And the way I'll practice it is in this group. Right? What I'm looking to practice is this sensation that I'm just quickly snapping down to the D to just tap the top of it. Right? And for me, that's how I would accomplish this passage. Same in the left hand. I would group. Ooh, not easy. Yeah, that's brutal. Yeah, and I would probably just make sure that I would fudge the B flat. Right? So what ends up happening is my whole unit is lifting up, and I think to put this C down, I'll end up just dropping the forearm a little bit and just dropping the hand a little bit. Pardon me. Pardon me. And I didn't practice putting hands together, so that would be a whole other thing. But not so bad putting these hands together because the grouping is the same. Right? So as far as an interdependence, from an interdependence standpoint, maybe not the worst bar in Mozart, Pardon me. Etc., etc. Anyways, I won't embarrass myself any further by trying to play it all together. With that, thanks for tuning in. I hope this was helpful to some people at least. Feel free to message me on Discord or on Signal, WhatsApp, email, my website, anything you want. Send me some passages if you want me to speak on anything further. And I might do another one of these. I had a few passages left over. I just ran out of time. So I might do another one of these soon. And yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for listening in. And I'm sure I'll see you all soon. Take care.